No tengo la menor duda. Es necesario, decimos, y dicen muchos intelectuales del mundo, trascender el capitalismo. Pero agrego yo, el capitalismo no se va a trascender por dentro del mismo capitalismo. No. Al capitalismo hay que trascenderlo por la vía del socialismo. Por esa vía es que hay que trascender el modelo capitalista. El verdadero socialismo, la igualdad, la justicia.
Revolución socialista. No se trata de capitalismo de Estado. Y ustedes tienen un papel vital que jugar ahí en el tema del control obrero, la autogestión obrera, la cogestión obrera socialista en las empresas que no deben ser del Estado, sino empresas del pueblo, manejadas por los trabajadores del pueblo. Yo estaba leyendo esta mañana, no me lo traje, ese librito pequeño pero muy bueno, de Vladimir Ilich Lenin, El Estado y la Revolución, la cuestión del Estado, pues. Tenemos que discutir eso, el Estado y la Revolución. Aquí Lenin le sale al paso algunas interpretaciones acerca del tema del Estado. Por ejemplo, aquí hay un subtítulo que dice la destrucción del Estado parásito. Eso sí es verdad que hay que acabarlo y lo más pronto posible. El Estado parásito, el Estado burgués, el Estado capitalista, y crear un nuevo Estado, un Estado revolucionario, socialista.
Okay, so since this talk is called Hugo Chavez and the Bolivarian Revolution, and I realized when I started preparing for this lead-off, I realized that these events that we're going to discuss took place at the very least 20 years ago. Chavez was giving this first speech about socialism in 2005. And I realized that it's now 2025, so it's 20 years later. So anyone in this room who's under the age of, let's say, 40, didn't live through these events. So the overwhelming majority of people in this room, the overwhelming majority of members of the RCI in the whole world, were not around at the time when these things were happening. And it is very difficult, I will say, to understand the Bolivarian Revolution and Hugo Chavez if you have not lived through some of these things, right? So I wanted to give you a 2-minute sample of how Hugo Chavez was like. And we are Marxists, and we think that the driving force of history is the class struggle. But the class struggle is made by men and women. And men and women, particularly people in leadership positions like Hugo Chavez, put their own stamp on events. We do not, as Marxists, we do not deny the role of the individual in history. And the role of Hugo Chavez was a very peculiar character. And he certainly put his stamp on events. Now, Hugo Chavez was elected in 1998 as the president of Venezuela. But you could say, anytime we discuss this, or we used to discuss this question, we could say that the Bolivarian Revolution really traces its roots back to 1989. 1989 saw the election in Venezuela of the government of Carlos Andrés Pérez. Venezuela is an oil-rich country, and this is one of its main characteristics, but also a curse for Venezuela. And in 1989, Venezuela was hit by a big crisis. At that time, there was a Latin American-wide foreign debt crisis, which also hit Venezuela. Carlos Andrés Pérez was elected. He was sworn in January 1989. And by the beginning of February, 1989, he implemented, many people voted for Carlos Andrés Pérez, was at the head of a social democratic party called Acción Democrática. Many people voted for him because in his previous time in office in 1976, he benefited from very high oil prices after 1973. And many people remember that time as a time of prosperity, and Venezuelan middle class people used to go to Miami and for their weekly shopping and stuff like that. The currency was very strong, and anyway, so many people voted for Carlos Andrés Pérez thinking they were going to get social democratic policies, but at the beginning of February '89, he introduced a massive package of austerity measures imposed by the IMF. And one of the measures was the lifting of subsidies on fuel in an oil-rich country, which immediately led to a trebling or ×4 increase in the prices of public transportation. So when people got to the buses to go to work in the morning of the 27th of February '89, the prices had gone up 4 times. People refused to board the buses, then they set the buses on fire, and this was the beginning of what was known as the Caracazo, an uprising which were misnamed because it wasn't just an uprising in the capital, Caracas, but it was an uprising throughout the country, which lasted for 2 or 3 weeks. There was looting, there was clashes with the police, the state had lost control of the situation, they used the army against the unarmed population, and hundreds, possibly thousands of people were killed. To this day, the full figure is not known. This event, the Caracazo, completely destroyed an agreement that was called a political system that had existed in Venezuela since the 1950s, which was called the Punto Fijo Agreement, an agreement between the 2 main parties, Acción Democrática, Social Democratic, and COPEI, Social Christian Democratic Party. They basically alternated in power between the 2 of them. Nothing changed. They distributed the positions of power in the state, in the oil company, and so on. And this was the end of that. From that point on, people didn't trust any of the political institutions. And as I said, the army was used against the unarmed population in that uprising. And this provoked a massive rift within the armed forces. There was a whole layer of young military officers, amongst them one Hugo Chavez, who was a military officer at that time, who thought, being trained, the official ideology of the army in Venezuela was Bolivarian. Bolivar had been the liberator, fought for independence from the Spanish Empire. And nowhere in Bolivar's official ideology was that the army should be used to attack the unarmed civilian population. The army was supposed to defend the country and so on. There was a political movement started from amongst these young military officers called the Revolutionary Bolivarian Movement. It was an underground organization. And in 1992, on the 4th of February, they attempted a civilian military uprising against the government that had ordered its troops against civilians. And this movement was led by Chavez. For reasons that are not relevant today, this movement failed. And Chavez was given an opportunity to come on national TV to tell his followers in the army to lay down arms. And he, in a very striking manner, he was on a national live TV broadcast, and he said, "The aims of our movement have not been achieved," but he added, "for now." And this was broadcasted live, so people, yeah, they lay down arms, but they remember that this is not the end of the story, right? We've been defeated, but we will come back. After a few years, he was released. He was put in jail. He was tried, put in jail for military uprising, obviously. And a few years later, he was released from jail under pressure from the population. There was another unpopular government carrying out privatizations and so on. And he decided that the insurrectionary way having failed, he will stand in the election in 1998. And as this election was developing, the ruling class, the oligarchy in Venezuela, was becoming more and more worried. This guy was now becoming very popular. And so different establishment politicians started to drop out from the elections just to concentrate in one candidate. By the end of the campaign, there were two candidates, Chavez and the candidate of the oligarchy. And he was seen. He traveled around the country. He spoke in small villages, in working class communities, in the poor neighborhoods that surround the capital, Caracas, the barrios. And he did a campaign talking to people. And basically what he managed to do was to bring into the election process the large numbers of people who've never participated in politics before, people who abstained and so on. And he won that election against the whole might of the oligarchy, the mass media, and so on. At the beginning, the ruling class thought, okay, well, this is a guy who knows nothing about politics. We can, he's defeated us, but we can work with him. We can steer him along safe channels. And there were some capitalist enterprises that financed the Chavez campaign in the hope of having some impact. But what was Chavez's program at that time? During his election campaign, Chavez came to Britain, and he spoke, I think he spoke at Oxford Union, and he met with one Tony Blair. And Tony Blair obviously was talking about the third way. And Chavez, you can see him in videos explaining the reasons. He said, oh, the third way, that sounds okay. I mean, it's not communism, and it's not capitalism. It's something for the people, isn't it? So he said, well, my ideology is the third way. We need clean politics in Venezuela. We need to do away with corruption, and we need to use the oil resources of the country for the benefit of the majority, not a small minority. We need to improve the conditions of people in general. A very moderate program, if you may. He was certainly not talking about socialism. He did not read State and Revolution or anything like this. And he came to power with this limited program. And he started doing things. First thing he did was to call a constituent assembly to draft a new constitution. Now you might think, well, this is just a political gimmick, isn't it? It doesn't change anything. No, it didn't change anything fundamental. But however, the process through which this new constitution was discussed involved everyone. People were discussing about this constitution. They wanted to put this thing in, that thing in. And for 10 years after, people in Venezuela, working class people, were carrying a copy of the Constitution, this size, there was a little edition of it, in their pocket. And every time they suffered an abuse from someone in a position of power, they will get the Constitution out and said, the people have the right to do this. It became a political tool for the people. The people felt that they had drafted that Constitution. It was their Constitution against the powerful. This was quite significant from the point of view of the consciousness. But also, as soon as he was elected, they started organizing, right? They organized the Bolivarian circles. They organized the urban land committees, all sorts of things in order to directly deal with the immediate problems. Problems of lack of access to housing, lack of access to clean water, lack of transportation in the working class neighborhoods, and everything. Now, in 2001, Chavez drafted and passed 21 enabling laws. The main one of these laws was the law of agrarian reform, the expropriation of land to give to the peasants. And there was also another law that he attempted to try to get control of the oil companies. Some people say Chavez expropriated the oil in Venezuela. This is not true. The oil was nationalized under Carlos Andrés Pérez in 1976. The oil company, PDVSA, the most important company in the country, was already in the state's hands, but it was run by a bureaucracy which was in cahoots with the private sector and the multinationals. They wanted progressive privatization. There's many examples of this. I don't have time to go into, but anyway, he tried to get control of the oil company. Now, this was a red rag to a bull for the oligarchy. The oligarchy said, okay, this guy, we can't work with him. We need to remove him from power, from the enabling laws. In December 2001, they started preparing a military coup to remove him from power. There were provocations, there were more provocations. the high-ranking managers in PDVSA, the executive directors, they refused to leave their positions, even though this is a state-owned company. The president has the right to remove them and so on. And there was a movement. This was class struggle, right? The opposition was drafted mainly from the middle, upper class areas in the east of Caracas. The Bolivarian supporters of the Bolivarian revolution, supporters of Chavez, were coming mainly from the working class areas in the barrios, in the west, and in the far east of, and in the working class areas generally in the country, amongst the poor masses in the cities. And this culminated in the April 11, 2002 coup against Chavez. It is a very good film. There was an Irish documentary team that was in Venezuela at the time, and they were fortunate enough to film everything that was happening from the inside. The film is called The Revolution Will Not Be Televised. It's available online. I recommend it, comrades, watch it. And there was a coup. Now, so far, nothing new. How many times we've had progressive governments come to power in Latin America, clash with the oligarchy, and then the oligarchy. When I say the oligarchy, this is, I mean, comrades say, oh, workers. There's workers, there's peasants, and there's capitalists. Well, what is this oligarchy? The oligarchy basically is the conglomerate of the owners of capital, the owners of the land, the old established families that have ruled the country. They're known in Venezuela as the owners of the valley, Los Amos del Valle, from a novel. And these people have ruled the country for 200 years. They think they have the God-given right to rule the country, and none of these people, including Chavez, have any right to office. They are ignorant and so on. Incidentally, this is one of the things that the oligarchy hated about Chavez. Chavez spoke the same language, same common language as ordinary working class people. He broke protocol. He was wearing tracksuits in official meetings, and this, why did they hate that so much? They hated that because usually in normal bourgeois democracy, politics is the preserve of the people who know, people who've gone to university, have degrees, they have letters in front of the names. And they are professional politicians or experts and think tanks and journalists and so on. And they are different from working class people who know nothing. The only contribution they can make to democracy is vote once every 4 years, once every 5 years. That's it. That's why they hated Chavez, because Chavez spoke in the language of the people, attempted to involve the people in the running of their own affairs, and they broke with this idea that. Only the few selected people can participate in politics. Now, as I said, there was a coup. The Spanish imperialism and US imperialism participated in the coup. The day after the editorials of El País in Spain, the New York Times, they said, democracy restored. The Chavez, the autocrat, is now been stopped. And this was a coup, right? The president, democratically elected president, was arrested, taken into a penal prison in an island of La Horquilla, and then a new government was sworn in a room like this in the presidential palace. A similar number of people, like in this room, they were all cheering for this guy, Pedro Carmona, who was president of the Business Federation, who was now the new president that was going to restore democracy. And they were so confident that they had won, they all signed the attendance list. And you can see it is in that film. They were all cheering, and then this guy Pedro Carmona says, "And now we're going to remove the Attorney General," and everyone's cheering, "Yeah!" "And now we're going to remove the constitutional, yeah!" So confident they signed the attendance list. Now, if you look at that attendance list, it was the who's who of the Venezuelan oligarchy. The Bishop of Caracas, the owners of the main TV stations and newspapers, the owners of the land, the owners of the industries, everyone was there, you know. The leaders of the bureaucratic trade unions, the CTV, they all signed on to this, and the military officers were behind that. And anyway, what is different in Venezuela is that in a space of 48 hours, the masses came out on the streets and defeated the coup. There was masses of people coming down from the barrios onto the presidential palace, and they were saying, no ha renunciado, lo tienen secuestrado. He's not resigned, they have kidnapped him. Because the story that was going on, they were showing cartoons on TV. They were keeping people in the dark, and they were saying Chavez has resigned because he has ordered the army to fire on the unarmed opposition demonstrations, people being killed, and he's resigned. And people saying, no, he's not resigned. We want to see. Where is he? He should tell us that he's resigned if he's resigned. And this is the president that we have put on. This is our president. We want him back, right? People gathered outside the 42nd Parachute Division in Maracay. And you have this situation, masses of people outside the military barracks. Finally, the army broke, and a whole section of the army went over to the people. This was made easier by the fact that Chavez was a military officer. So he had close contacts in the army high command, and some people were vacillating, some people under the pressure of the masses. But anyway, it was the masses that brought the president back. And you can see it in this film. It's very funny because these people, these bourgeois, are all in the presidential palace. And then after a while, they can see something's wrong. The presidential guards coming back, and then they all running. They're running like rats. They're scurrying away, and the people won a victory on the 13th of April. Actually, I have the T-shirt. This T-shirt says, every 11 has its 13th. This is the slogan of the people in Venezuela for many years after that. They said, look, we defeated this coup. And the coup they had defeated. And what did Chavez do after this defeat of the coup? He came out and said he was shocked. He never expected a coup. He knew things were being planned and so on, but he was, above all, he was against any bloodshed, any revenge or anything like this. And he said, let's have a negotiating table with the opposition. Let's sort all these things out in a peaceful manner. He conciliated, he negotiated. Now, I was in Venezuela one time, and I stayed, I went and visited this comrade's house, and his mom was from Colombia. But she lived in Venezuela for a long time. And she was a very religious woman. She had a crucifix in her fridge door. And you could see it was a pious woman. And we were talking about, what do you think about the Bolivarian Revolution? She said, listen, since this started, I am now Venezuelan. I'm no longer Colombian. With apologies to Nico, I'm no longer Colombian. I feel I'm Venezuelan. I am part of this revolution. He says, but I'll tell you one thing. This is a person with no political education, no political involvement, no political experience. She said, when I saw the president come out on the people's balcony, as it was known since that point, on the 13th when it was returned, when I saw the president come out on the people's balcony, and on one hand, he had the Constitution, and on the other hand, he had a cross. I said, that's bad news. He should have come out with the sword of Bolivar and start chopping the heads of all these traitors. Okay, so Chavez has been accused of many things. He's an authoritarian figure, an autocrat, and trampled over democratic rights. All lies, all a pack of lies. And he actually made a mistake. He said, oh, let's compromise, let's negotiate with the opposition. A whole number of negotiating tables were open for months on end. They were talking. And in the meantime, the opposition was preparing another coup. Of course, they'd not been satisfied with one. They wanted a successful one. So in December 2002, the same year, December 2002, they organized another attempt. This attempt consisted in a whole number of military officers declaring themselves in rebellion. They went into the Altamira Square in the east of Caracas. And then, most importantly, the high command, the executive directors of PDVSA and all the high-ranking some technicians, engineers, and so on, they declared themselves on strike. This was, let's be clear, a bosses' strike, a lockout, a reactionary lockout against the economy. And the idea was we want to bring PDVSA, the oil company, to a standstill, and this will wreck the government. This will break the back of the government. The economy cannot work without the oil industry. And what happened? This lockout went on for about 2 months, nearly 3 months. It started on the 4th of December, 2002, and then lasted until February 2003. And what happened in the meantime was the following. The masses came out on the streets again through self-organization. They surrounded the oil installations, the filling stations, the oil refineries, the oil wells, everything. And with the collaboration of some loyal workers from the industry, and some workers who had been sacked from the industry for political reasons, they came back. The workers and the workers' control, the workers of PDVSA, re-established production in the oil industry. We are not talking about a small textile factory in Argentina or something like this, and the works of 200 workers. No, we're talking about an industry that at that time employed about 20,000 people, is a very advanced, technologically advanced satellite systems, computerized systems. The workers were running this mammoth of a company for 2 months under workers' control. There was a point, there's so many anecdotes that illustrate this. I don't have the time to give them all, but there was one point at which the Minister of Oil called the workers in this installation, the cryogenic plant at Jose. This is the place where they take gas and they pressurize it and they put it on oil tankers, LNG. The oil minister called these workers that were running this installation. They said, "What do you need? Right? You've done a very good job. How can we help you?" And these oil workers said, "Well, I mean, we're running this. There's not much we can need. Can you send us some managers? This is the only thing that we don't have." The workers were running this and the workers control. They were not fully conscious of what they had done. They didn't need managers. That was the whole point. They were running it under workers control. The managers were completely redundant. Okay, so that was the second massive defeat for the opposition. Now, at this point, Chavez was in no mood to compromise anymore. At this point, I think it was in April 2003, he declared the anti-imperialist character of the revolution. He said, this revolution is now anti-imperialist. The United States have participated in these 2 coups quite clearly. Now, some people at that time, some people I know personally, were very afraid. They said, okay, this is it now. Now there's going to be, now this is going to go down the same way as Allende in Chile. And there's going to be a coup. And I was thinking, there has already been 2 coups. What are you talking about? It's not Chavez that's provoking imperialism. This has already happened. There's already been 2 coups. Anyway, so Chavez decided to go forward at that time. There was something else that happened because the bosses had gone on a lockout. They locked the workers out of the factories, right? In some places that I know, in the Nissan factory in Carabobo, the workers went in and they said, unless you allow us back into this factory to produce, we're going to jump the fence and start producing under workers' control. The bosses opened the gates. But in some other places, the workers had been locked out for 2 months. And then when the lockout was defeated, the bosses then said, well, we're not going to pay you the wages for that. And the workers said, what? We never voted to go on strike. This is your stuff. You need to pay us. And then, as a result of this, a wave of factory occupations started throughout the country. It was the whip of the counter-revolution that was pushing the workers forward. And then, this is a funny story. Chavez went to a meeting that had been organized by a tendency within the workers' movement that was calling itself the class struggle tendency. And there was a meeting about occupied factories. And there was a big banner that said, fábrica cerrada, fábrica ocupada. Factory that shut down should be occupied by the workers, right? Something like this. And Chavez went there. He had been invited to the closing session of this meeting. And he looked at that banner and said, that's a very good idea. That's a very good idea. Now this is what we should do. If the bosses shut down the factories, the workers should occupy them, and the government will legalize it. Now, this is a bit unusual, right? This guy is a military officer with no previous history of left-wing politics or socialist politics, but in this case, the fact that he was a military officer and not a politically trained person was an advantage, right? He'd not been trained for 30 years in reformism. This is things you can do, this is things you cannot do. And no. He was a practical man. And he said, okay, this sounds like a good idea. After all, look, I mean, these guys have shut down the factory. They don't want to run the factories. We'll let the workers run the factories, and we'll legalize it. And then he instructed his Minister of Labor, Maria Cristina Iglesias, to draft a list of all the factories in the country that had been idle or semi-abandoned or facing problems for the workers to occupy them. And one day, Maria Cristina Iglesias, the Minister of Labor, came on the television and said, this is the list. 1,200 factories semi-paralyzed, idle. The workers should occupy them. Now, when have you seen a government like this? Right? What I'm trying to say is, this is not just someone who came to power and introduced some progressive measures, of which there were many. This is a revolution, right? This is a government and a movement that was moving in the direction of breaking with capitalism and breaking with the capitalist state and breaking with protocol and bourgeois democracy, direct action by the workers themselves. In January 2005, Chavez nationalized 2 factories. Venepal, a paper mill in Aragua, and the CNV, a valve-making private company that was working for PDVSA in Los Teques, Miranda, near the capital. And he did say something similar to what you said there. He said, we're nationalizing these factories, but this is not state capitalism. The workers must run these factories. This is nationalization under workers' control. And so the workers did elect a president from amongst their own ranks. In Veval, which is how the valve factory was then, some comrades here have been in this factory. It was run by a member of this international who had been elected the president of this factory by the workers. And they had all sorts of things. They had rotation of positions. They had weekly mass meetings for accounting. The leadership was elected by the workers. And it was a factory under workers' control, which was owned by the state, right? And then there was a big movement of factory occupations and workers' control. Now, in December 2005, this thing was going ahead, right? There's a dialectical interrelationship between Chavez and the masses. The more Chavez moves forward, pushed by the opposition and by the movement of the masses, the more he speaks in a more radical way, the more the masses become more radicalized. Chavez had a weekly TV program which was called Aló Presidente, Hi President. And he will speak for hours. 4 hours, 5 hours, and he will speak about all sorts of things. He will go to different parts of the country, talk to people in a meeting like this, and he will say, so what's your problem? Do you have land here? And he will try to talk to people and then work out the ideas, how to solve the problems. And he became extremely popular. He bypassed the official channels of the bourgeois media. He was talking directly to the masses. People made fun of this program, but it was a mass exercise in political education. And he will have, I remember, he will have a map of Venezuela. He said, well, Venezuela is not a poor country. Here we have oil, and then we have fertile land over there. There's some mines, gold mines in the south, and then there's these basic industries in Bolivar, and there's no reason why people should be poor in a rich country. We must use this wealth for the benefit of the majority. This is political education, because this is an idea that breaks with the whole of the capitalist system as it's been run in Venezuela for 200 years. Now, as I said, in December 2005, he went to the World Social Forum. It's in the first video there. He went to the World Social Forum in Porto Alegre in Brazil, and he said this. He said, I've been thinking for a long time, I've been reading, and I've been talking to intellectuals, and I've reached the conclusion that what we want to achieve in Venezuela cannot be done within capitalism. We must transcend capitalism, and we must go to socialism. Now, this is 2005, right? at the back end of the collapse of Stalinism, where no one in Europe was talking about socialism. Forget about it. No trade union, labor movement, left leaders were talking about socialism. They all talked about, but I don't know, you don't remember, but there was a thing at that time called TINA. There is no alternative. Right? There's only neoliberal capitalism or nothing else. And there is this guy who is a military officer, he is the president, democratically elected president of the country, and he starts saying that we need to go to socialism. This was an earthquake in Venezuela. Everyone was talking about socialism everywhere. I remember very well, I was in Venezuela just before this speech, and I was talking to some guy, David Velázquez, who was the leader of the communist youth. And I said, we were intervening in Venezuela at this time. We were saying, yeah, Bolivarian revolution, very good. But we need to go towards socialism. This cannot be done within capitalism. We were the first ones to say this. But obviously, our voice is not the same as the voice of the president. But anyway, so I was talking to this guy, David Velázquez, and he said, no. The character of the Venezuelan revolution, this is the General Secretary of the Communist Youth, character of the Venezuelan revolution is a Bolivarian revolution. It's a national, democratic, anti-imperialist revolution. And socialism is not on the agenda. We shouldn't even raise it. And I said, okay. Then, no, I didn't say okay. I said, okay, I take note, this is your position. We continue to argue for socialism, and many people were telling us, no, this is a Bolivarian revolution, it's different, this is not, this was in the 20th century, this is something new. And anyway, and then the minute Chavez talks about socialism, the communist youth is now, yes, we must go to socialism. Anyway, everyone. There was even at one point an organization that was set up that was called Businessmen for Socialism. Socialism was so popular, you can't imagine it. Then Chavez went to another election. There's been so many elections. I can see Julian Sharp is laughing about this, but there were, I think there were 14 different elections in regional elections, national elections, Constituent Assembly elections, constitutional referendum elections. I don't know, there were so many elections. You can't have a more democratic revolution. Anyway, so he went to another election in August 2006, never mind the month. He went to another election, and Chavez said, this is not about Chavez. This election is about socialism. If you are in favor of socialism, vote for me. If you are against socialism, don't vote for me, right? Clearest, impossible to be clearer, right? And what was the result of that election? Well, first of all, there was a turnout of 78%. 78%. The highest turnout ever in any election in Venezuela and many other countries. And socialism won by over 62%, right? This was the highest point of Chavez's popular support. And so he then said, from now on, we're going to build socialism. But obviously, Chavez didn't have a very clear idea of what socialism was or how it looked like, or how to get there. You know, one day he was saying to the workers, take over the factories. The next day he was meeting businessmen and said, well, you should invest in Venezuela. The difference is that the businessmen knew better than that, right? Whatever the president said, they knew that the workers were taking over factories and that the president was legalizing that. So they were not going to invest, right? But he had many confusions. But they started implementing, just very quickly, there were some material gains of the revolution. But remember this. In 2002, when the masses defeated the coup, there had been no material gains for the revolution, right? This was purely a movement on the basis of the consciousness of the masses had been raised in the self-organization. But by 2006, 2007, they implemented what they call the misiones, the social programs. And there was one called Misión Barrio Adentro, where they brought primary health care to the working class neighborhoods, where Venezuelan doctors didn't even want to go. And they had to bring Cuban doctors. But they set up primary healthcare centers in the poorest areas up in the hills around Caracas. They had the Misión Robinson, which abolished illiteracy. There was an old woman there was an old woman of 90 who was interviewed on the telly. She just learned how to read and write for the first time in her life. And they asked her, what do you want to do next? She said, well, I want to go to university. This is it. This is how the people's expectations were lifted by this revolution. They had another one called Misión Milagro, Miracle Mission, where hundreds of thousands of people were operated of cataracts, so they could now see, and previously they couldn't see. These material gains of the revolution were massive. There was a massive program of agrarian reform, factory occupations, and so on. However, there was the Misión Vivienda. I think it's 3 million housing units have been built and given for free to working class families in Venezuela, which at that time was a country of 30 million people, right? And this was possible on the basis of what? Okay, because this is an interesting question. Venezuela remained all the way until Chavez's death and today a capitalist country. So how is this possible? Basically, they used the oil money, and oil went up very much at that. The oil prices went up very much at that time. There was a boom in oil prices. They used that in order to pay for all these social services, right? Without abolishing capitalism. Not only this, there was something. This is the limitations of the Bolivarian revolution and Chavez himself. For instance, they in the field of the economy, what they did in order to fight the sabotage of the ruling class was to introduce controls, right? State controls over the economy. So they introduced price controls. When the private sector was hoarding and speculating and black marketing over basic food products, they introduced price controls. Instead of expropriating the owners of these distribution chains, Mr. Mendoza, who owned Grupo Polar, which controls the main distribution of food in Venezuela. And then there was a flight of capital, so they introduced currency change controls. And so they introduced more and more controls. The problem with this, Alan explained it very well, many times in Venezuela itself, is the problem is that you have not abolished capitalism and created a planned economy, which can run the economy, but you have made impossible the functioning of the free market capitalism. And therefore, you have the worst of both worlds. You don't have a planned economy, but you don't have a capitalist economy either. And this is the main reason, I will say, one of the main reasons for economic problems in Venezuela, which existed already under Chavez. And then the other thing is that in relation to the state, Chavez said this thing many times. He said, we must pulverizar, we must smash to smithereens the capitalist state, the bourgeois state. This is a president saying that on television. This is quite powerful. But did he do that? No. He said we must replace the capitalist state with a communal state. And people started organizing themselves in communes in the working class areas, in the neighborhoods. But these communes didn't really have power, and the state still existed. There was a parallel, I don't know, a dual power situation under the same head. I don't know, it's a very difficult thing to understand. And what happened was that the old state apparatus still existed in reality. And in fact, it was sabotaging even some direct instructions from Chavez. I'll just give you one example. I feel I'm running out of time, but maybe I'll take 5 minutes extra. I'll just give you one anecdote. There's this comrade I mentioned before, Jorge Paredes. He was the president, the workers-elected president of Inveval, a factory that was now nationalized, made valves for the oil industry. So he had the right to attend a meeting of all the directors of all the companies related to the oil industry with the president, right? So Chavez was in this meeting. There was, I don't know, 100 people there. And then Chavez turned around, turned to this guy. Chavez was like this, you know, he will turn on a minister on live television and demand answers. And the minister didn't have the answers. Anyway, so he turned to Jorge Paredes and said, Jorge, I have heard that the CNV, Inveval, your factory, is not delivering the valves that PDVSA is ordering. Obviously, there was an interest in the bureaucrats at the head of PDVSA to rubbish workers' control. Workers' control doesn't work. Look, I mean, they can't even deliver the valves that we order. And then Jorge said, no, President, that's not true. That's not true. In fact, what is happening is that the bureaucracy at PDVSA, and he pointed at the guy who was the president of PDVSA, Rafael Ramirez, who's now in exile and was involved in some corruption scandal. He pointed to Rafael Ramirez and says, they are ordering the valves that they know we cannot produce, so as to set us to fail, and then say we can't do it. He says, however, Mr. President, if you nationalize this other valve foundry, which is nearby, we will be able to make these other valves. And then the president said, okay, well, nacionalícese, expropiese. Let's expropriate that as well. But the president turned to Rafael Ramirez and said, is this true? And Rafael Ramirez couldn't say otherwise. He just mumbled. And anyway, this is an example of how the bureaucracy of the state was sabotaging even the president's direct orders. He said at one point, he said, I feel like I'm in a nest of alacranes. How do you say that? A nest of scorpions. I mean, a nest of scorpions. The people who surrounded them, they were just out to get him to sabotage his direct instructions. And so basically, it's a clear demonstration that you cannot, what did Marx say? You cannot take the instruments of the bourgeois state and use them for the benefit of the working class. You need to destroy that state and create a workers' state, right? State based on the committees, direct election, accountability, and so on. Anyway, so these were the main contradictions. And in his last months, Chavez died in, when did he die? In 2013. Had cancer, he died. But as he knew he was dying, he made one last speech. And his last speech was called Change the Rudder, change course, basically, golpe de timón. And he said, in this speech he said, we talk a lot about socialism. We have a roundabout, we inaugurate a roundabout, we call it, this is a socialist roundabout, or we inaugurate a factory, this is a socialist school or a socialist factory. But in reality, we don't have socialism. We still have a capitalist economy. And until and unless we destroy this capitalist economy, replace it by a socialist economy, we will not go forward. And then he said, and the capitalist state also must be abolished and destroyed. We need a communal state. That's how he called it, based on the communes, right? But he was aware of this. But one, he didn't really know how to advance. And two, he didn't have a party. One man cannot carry out a socialist revolution. And the people he had around him were not particularly the best elements. Some of them were giving bad advice. Some of them were deliberately, including one Nicolás Maduro. Nicolás Maduro, even when Chavez was ill, he went to Cuba for treatment. And as he was away from the country, Nicolás Maduro, who was a minister of something, I can't remember, he set out to destroy workers' control. So there was all these big factories in Bolivar state, in Sidor, Alcázar, Ferrominera, a whole number of big factories. These are steel mills, aluminum smelters and stuff like that. And they were all run by workers. Chavez had said, this must be run by workers. There should be a workers' assembly to elect the leadership, and we must have a socialist plan of production here. And Maduro went there and destroyed workers' control in every single one of those factories, using all sorts of dirty methods, sacking people, undermining people, removing them from. This was still when Chavez was alive. So I would say that's the main, the Venezuelan revolution has many lessons. One is about the strength and the power of the masses when they set themselves to do something, particularly in relation to workers' control. This was phenomenal. And also is the question of the leadership. There wasn't a leadership that was putting all these things together and moving forward in a clear way. And a leadership cannot be improvised in the course of a revolution. It's too late. Even if you have someone as extraordinary as Chavez was a man who was very open to discussing ideas, he was reading a lot. Someone said this morning, Malcolm X in jail was reading 15 hours. I don't know how many hours Chavez was reading, but he once said to Alan, I think he said, yeah, he spent until 2 or 3 in the morning reading, and then he woke up at 6 in the morning to start running the country, you know. But he read lots of stuff. He read Reason in Revolt. He read Bolshevism, and he recommended both books on a national TV broadcast, and he learns things from he not just said, I read these books. He said, in the Reason in Revolt book, I found something very profound idea. He says, when there is a chemical reaction, there is something called the Biggs energy. And the Biggs energy is what makes this, catalyzes this chemical reaction and makes it happen. And this is what we need here. We need the Biggs energy so that this revolution becomes a revolution that cannot be reversed or rolled back. So he was aware that there was something still missing. Anyway, he was a very peculiar character. He was a brilliant man, and he was very in tune with the pressure from the masses, and he derived his energy from them, and then he gave it back to the masses. But as I said, the two main lessons of the Bolivarian Revolution, apart from the strength of the masses, is that the question of the economy, the question of the state are crucial. And now, just to say in 2 minutes, look, then Chavez died in 2013, and then after Chavez died, around 2014-15, there was the collapse in oil prices. The Chinese economy was slowing down. There was no, anyway, for whatever reason, the price of oil went from $100 a barrel to $27 a barrel in the space of 1 year. And this destroyed any possibility of oil socialism, of using the oil resources for social programs without touching capitalism. And this is the main reason for the economic crisis in Venezuela, which started more or less around that time. The government followed a crazy policy of monetary expansion, which led to a massive devaluation a massive devaluation. This is the worst episode of hyperinflation at any time in the history of the world. You might have heard about the hyperinflation in the Weimar Republic. This is worse, right? Much worse. And then on top of this, obviously there was the sanctions from the United States, the sabotage of the ruling class, and Maduro decided that the only way forward was to implement a package of monetarist adjustment. And so particularly after 2018, can go into the details, but after 2018, everything that the Bolivarian Revolution had done, Maduro reversed. Chavez expropriated factories, nationalized factories, Maduro privatized them. Chavez introduced workers' control, encouraged workers' control, Maduro destroyed workers' control. Chavez expropriated the land and gave it to the peasants. Maduro took the land away from the peasants, gave it to the land owners. Chavez encouraged the organization of the workers, and in 2018, Maduro destroyed collective bargaining by decree and destroyed the workers' conditions, and then progressively proceeded to eliminate all possibility of a left-wing opposition. The Patria para Todos party, the Communist Party, the Tupamaros, the Linarron party, a whole number of left parties that were small or big, they were all had the electoral registration taken away, and workers who tried to resist this and organize, they were put in jail with no due process and so on. So from a revolution, you ended up with a counter-revolution. But worse than that, because this counter-revolution had a line of continuation from Chavez, right? Maduro had been put in power by Chavez himself. Maduro swore loyalty to Chavez and the Bolivarian Revolution and socialism. So you have a situation now where you have a complete counter-revolution, but people are completely against this government, but they think, many of them think, that this government is a socialist government, that this government is a Bolivarian government, that this government is somehow linked to Chavez. So the situation is quite bleak in Venezuela. Having said that, we obviously still have the same position. The United States, Trump has no right to remove or not the government in Venezuela. Our position continues to be hands of Venezuela. This is irrespective, regardless of the political regime that there is in Venezuela. This is a question, basic question of imperialism against an oppressed nation, and we are on the side of the oppressed nation, despite the fact that we opponents, adversaries of the Nicolás Maduro government.
For a fantastic introduction to the discussion.